I'm Sharon Miller.
I'm Rob Dietz.
And I'm Jason Bradford. Welcome to Crazy Town, where the only thing we can be certain of is that some overconfident man will offer us salvation.
Hi, this is Crazy Town producer Melody Allison. Thanks for listening. Here in Season 5, we're exploring false prophets and the dangerous messages they're so intent on spreading. If you like what you're hearing, please let some friends know about this episode or the podcast in general. Quick warning, sometimes this podcast uses swear words.
Language!
Now, on to the show.
Hey guys, Rob, Jason. I was thinking, here we are, this is the last episode of the season.
Yeah, it's just tough day.
Well, I was just reflecting back on kind of the ground we covered. And it reminded me of something that happened a few years ago, which was there's this competition that the MacArthur Foundation, which is this really large foundation, they're known for having this MacArthur, people call it Genius Awards. That
probably some of our false prophets have received.
Possibly. That would be a good thing to check out. Anyways, they decided that they were going to go big a few years ago, and they had $100 million grant that they were going to give to one organization.
Go big or go home, baby.
Right. And I remember hearing from all of these people, they got excited about this prospect, and they also had formed this huge advisory board. Lots of people were reviewing things. In fact, our former board president, Debbie Cook, was on that advisory board. And so I was talking to a lot of people who were planning on submitting a proposal for this. And I was asked, you guys should submit something. What are you going to do?
Yeah.
Come up with something that you could do for $100 million.
Obviously, you failed.
Well, we didn't submit anything. The only thing I could think of was start a cult.
Okay.
Imagine starting a cult with an influx of $100 million. You don't have to go small and slowly scale it up.
Right.
Do it on some start.
This is a lot of work. I mean, the AI cult generator that is now makes it easy.
One of our sponsors
save a lot of
on
money.
The season.
But back in that time period, that would have been quite a bit of work.
You had to find some kind of charismatic leader. You had to find some rituals, some beliefs to kind of coalesce around.
Brainwash people.
And here's the thing: I was just thinking about the fact that we've done our level best.
Yeah.
Trying to challenge some of the ideas of these false prophets this season. But we got to be honest, they're kicking our ass.
Oh my gosh.
Right?
Nobody wants to join the organic farming limits to growth cult. I mean, it just doesn't have the same cachet as the eating green cheese off the moon while you're
we could have some sort of nature worshipping, sort of like being a peasant's not a bad thing kind of cult.
I think it's got to be about sex.
Well, peasants have sex.
Yeah, we've tied in together.
There's a lot of barnyard
back
sex
to the
going
land
on, too. You can just watch.
Jesus Christ.
Here in the Pacific Northwest, too, you got the Rajneesh cult that they were
doing a lot of sex stuff there, too.
Yeah.
But you're right. We are not doing well compared to the sorts of cults that could spiral out from the false prophets.
Well, certainly... who's going to be the leader? Is that going to be one of us?
No way. That's a failure of a cult right out of the gate.
Yeah, so we'd have to recruit.
We have to
recruit.
God, it's going to be tough. I don't know. I think we just have to wait for the AIs to catch up to help us out with this because we're not good enough, honestly.
Well, we need the AIs and we need the sort of the singularity fusion kind of or the weird long-termist kind of breeding, the effective altruist breeding of the perfect human being.
But we also have fear on our side, right? If we go with Guy McPherson, we're all going to be dead in 3 years. We can get that cult really jumping. Yeah,
that's true.
I think you're making a good point, though. It's I hear this somewhere we need a new religion. We need something beyond the lay out your argument, the intellectual, debate sort of thing. We need something emotional. We think that grabs that amygdala and just sinks its nails into it and just,
grabbed by the amygdala.
Yeah.
Amygdala. It's amygdala. Come on.
Okay. Well, I'm going to rename it in my cult.
Right. This is the amygdalarian.
It's the amygdalarians. Okay. And if you argue with me that
you're out.
You're out.
So you are the cult leader then. It's solved.
Well, okay. I think we go back to the drawing board, guys, because we're not...
Not many people signing up for the amygdalarians.
I'm already tired of this cult. I want out. All right. Well, let's let's get in. Here we are. This is our opportunity to sort of reflect on the season, all right? So
Okay.
let's talk about it. Let's do a little reflection.
All right, I'll try not to cry. I get emotional.
And let's, because we're old, our memories are addled.
Yes.
We probably don't even remember
It's hard to remember what I talked about a few
all
months
the
ago.
false prophets that we've talked about. So I'm going to kind of reorient us. And
By the way, what was the idea you proposed to the MacArthur Foundation? I can't remember it.
exactly, it was nothing. I'm too much of a realist to know that they would ever fund anything that we would come up with, so I didn't bother. Okay, so let's reorient, okay?
Yeah.
We intentionally, I don't know if listeners got this, but we intentionally sort of had I don't know if it's an arc, but we had a process by which we ordered the false prophets that we kind of looked at this year. So we started with a progress myth, right? That was our good buddy Steven Pinker, and then Ray Kurzweil, two expressions of the myth of progress. Then we went into neoliberalism. We got Jack Welch, we got Bill Clinton, we got Tom Friedman.
I was confused because I thought that part of the season was more of our impersonations time, which is
That
where
was for you.
Went a little nuts with Bill Clinton there.
Yeah.
And then we went into eco-modernism. We spent quite a bit of time really looking at eco-modernism.
Yeah.
We had Gates. Even though we were talking about him as a philanthropist, Gates is very much an eco-modernist. Stuart Brand, and then we had, the two-headed beast, whatever we had called it.
I can't remember.
Mark Jacobson and David Keith.
I can't remember what it is.
Amygdala, I think.
Amygdala.
Right.
Okay.
So we had Jacobson and Keith, and then we went to effective altruism. I personally could have spent a lot more time on that, but we just focused on our good buddy McCaskill there. Then we went into doomerism, right? So we talked about Moore, McPherson, Steve Bannon.
Yep.
And then we ended it with like the hybrid storm of Elon Musk, right? Who sort of like manifested so many of the other.
I bet he would like that title. That could be his nickname.
Hybrid
Elon,
Storm.
the Hybrid Storm Musk.
Yeah.
And of course, he's going to give us money.
Yeah.
Because we focus on him.
Totally.
Yeah.
And then I will say it's pretty obvious that there's a lot of overlapping traits between these false prophets. You could have easily grouped some of them in different categories. So I wouldn't say it's totally arbitrary, but obviously there's some permeable boundaries between these different categories.
I really liked the groupings when we were coming up with them early in the season. It really helped me think about the evolution and also focusing on the ideas.
I like that you talk about the evolution.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I talk about.
Yeah. I wonder, though, with all these false prophets that we've covered, which one bugs us the most? Which one is the one that really gets under your skin, and what type, that sort of thing. And I'm going to tell you mine, because I'm just itchy to do this.
I remember this.
So the person is McPherson, which is odd, because I don't think we rated him badly on the insufferability index or something like that. But
not the worst. But
the problem is, and there's other doomers too that are in this. It's not even really doomers. It's guys that were in lockstep with us in the things they know, the ideas that they're contributing. But then, they might go 75% of the way, right? They might say ecosystems are imperiled.
Yep.
We need to think in systems. There's problems we need to deal with the climate, that kind of thing. And then all of a sudden they're off. The last 25% of what they would say is completely off the rails compared to what we would say. So like McPherson does that. He says, we're just going to all be dead in 3 years' time. But then you had Stuart Brand kind of that way. If you remember, I told you guys, I thought this guy was an environmental hero, but it turns out he's an eco-modernist thinking we're all going to be living in O'Neill space colonies by 1979.
Right. I think that leads to my thought about this was that the eco-modernists were sort of the most upsetting to me because of that reason, right? And they're part of like the double downer, kind of group of people that just do more harder of what gotten us into this mess. And in particular, what bothered me was the Jacobson and Keith with the species I call the complexifixer, just the extreme engineering our way kind of solutionism. That really bothered
because the
me.
system either doesn't need to change, how we're living doesn't need to change, or it won't change, basically.
Right.
So
and their ideas are so out of whack scale-wise with what is remotely possible.
But it's true that they're proximate to us in the sense that I genuinely believe they share the same concerns.
Totally.
Deeply.
Yeah. Some of them are same problem I have. Like I feel like Mark Jacobson, we come at it from the same angle. Like, oh, here's a problem. I want to solve it. And the solution set is very frustrating.
Yes.
Yeah. I think for me, it's funny, like it's probably the progress myth because not only is it so ubiquitous, it's like kind of unquestioned a little bit. It's so pervasive. And so to have people who are kind of purveying that and reinforcing it when it just feels like utter denial of what we're facing. But it's funny because the two guys that we picked for that, I have really different reactions to. Like, I had a lot of fun doing the Kurzweil episode.
Yes.
I gotta be honest. Like,
Yeah,
I enjoyed it because it was so fucking outlandish.
Yeah,
Do you know what I mean?
computronium. I mean,
computronium. Like, I still can't get over
thing.
it.
I mean,
I just can't get over it.
Yeah.
You know? Whereas Pinker was, in some ways, I don't think we scored him super high in the insufferability index, but a guy that genuinely gets under my skin.
Yeah, I would much rather hang out with Kurzweil than Pinker. Kurzweil would be kind of fun to hang out with.
And you might actually get a nanobot cleanse if you hang with Kurzweil.
But no, I think Kurzweil is just so geeked out,
Yeah.
you know, that he just believes kind of impossible things, right? Whereas Pinker's like, God damn it.
Yeah.
We have to keep enlightenment and all the benefits of all this stuff. So I'm going to absolutely resist any idea that there are limits to anything.
Right.
You know what I mean? And fuck you for like questioning me.
Right,
You know? Like,
right.
And so that definitely gets under my skin for sure.
Well, that's good. I mean, you just did that without any blood coming out of any of your
No,
orifices.
there are a few. We definitely need Curtis's, language.
Well, there were times this season I thought you were gonna just flip your lid.
Yeah.
We've processed a lot. I think we're able with more equanimity now to talk about this.
I don't know, man.
Yeah. We'll see. Jury's
We'll
still
see.
out.
Let's talk about some of the commonalities and themes across our false prophets. I mean, we talked about how they, the boundaries between some of these different groupings are not fixed necessarily, but any other commonalities?
Well, you remember that in the phylogenetic treatment that I hypothesized that hubris was
right.
the common trait of all species of false prophets, whereas the outgroup, the peasants, the humble peasant, lack that.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a key one. And you see this, of course, with a lot of, like you're saying, Pinker is just like, don't even, if you dare, a lot of these people just get so upset, like they don't want to have these nuanced conversations. They also tend to be very self-promotional. I mean, that's why they're well known and famous in a sense, and their ideas are out there. But you get this sense that these people think very highly of themselves. And then this leads to this overconfidence, this false certainty. So those are the kind of traits I see.
I think there's things that we could learn from them. I mean, I decided that I was, they have decals on cars.
Yeah.
I got a picture of myself and I put it on the side of the car because I'm trying to embody more of that self-promotion thing.
Sure. Yeah.
And might as well put a Crazy Town sticker on it.
Yeah.
Too.
Yeah. I don't think I'd key anyone's car that had a picture of themselves on it. I mean,
No,
that
you
would be.
wouldn't?
I would never do something like that.
Okay.
So some of those traits you just mentioned, the overconfidence, the false sense of certainty, it kind of leads into another common thread, which is every single one of our false prophets is a man.
Yeah.
There's this inherent maleness into the selections, and it wasn't really on purpose, but I think it obviously comes down to some of those traits. But it really makes me wonder, how the hell do we have a taxonomy if it's all males? Like, how were there ever any offspring for these species?
Right.
Valid question.
Very good question. I'll have to look into that.
Yeah.
I'll get back
It's
to
like
you.
a Jurassic
This is
Park
a very
thing.
deep biological.
Right, well, yeah.
Self-fertilizing.
Kurzweil is the one who.
Oh,
actually,
right.
That's the origin story.
What was the title of that episode?
How to have sex with yourself?
Yeah, I think we just solved our own question.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess power and status issues come up then a lot. Okay, which is typical. Males often. I mean, it's not true. Maybe it's more of these. Maybe like 90% of the problem of these kind of dynamics tend to be male. We could probably find plenty of examples of women who would have these similar issues, but I think this is definitely a thing where you get this power and status through your personality, through your self-promotion,
or your circumstances,
or your luck that you fall into.
Right.
And then you get too much attention. You become so successful. People start calling you these wonderful things. You win MacArthur Genius Awards.
Right.
You get on the Late Show.
You've got You got heads of state on speed dial on your phone,
Yes,
and
you
then
win
you have
these-
to let people know about
You have
it.
a picture of yourself decaled to your car.
Yeah, you win
Hey.
giant NSF grants. You have this big famous
Best
lab.
selling
You get
books.
it. You can charge $100,000 to go to a speaking gig. And so once you're out there so much, then I think it becomes very hard to not do anything but double down on whatever position you took. So there might be a critique out there that's valid, but honestly, how hard would it be to listen to that and say and change your mind when that's what you're known for?
Yeah. Now, Jason, I gotta admit, I've been a little jealous of all the work that you've done, on your paper, the taxonomy thing.
I can feel
did,
that.
the
I understand.
dichotomous
Yeah.
study.
Fame.
Yeah.
He's like one of the guys that he was just describing now. He's out on the road charging $100,000 to talk about the false prophet taxonomy.
Right.
For supporters of Crazy Town though, I get very good rates, very discount rates. Just let me know. Contact me.
So I decided I'm going to come up with my own equation.
Okay.
Right, and it's as scientific as economic equations
Sure.
and
Yeah,
these other
right.
things, right?
Yeah.
So here's thinking about commonalities, or you could think of this as like a recipe,
Sure.
for
How to create a false prophet.
a false prophet souffle.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just go.
So you start with a little dab of family history trauma, trauma in the family or trauma in your family history.
Sure.
Some of our false prophets, we talked about them as coming from basically second generation Holocaust
Sure.
or coming from families that had suffered from pogroms and other kinds of things.
Yeah.
So trauma in the family, disconnection from nature,
Very.
growing up in cities, not having experiences out in nature, coming from circumstances where there's a high premium on education,
Yep.
right? Probably, I would say these guys all have fairly high mental aptitude, if you tested them on those kind of
Yep. A
traditional
lot of advanced
measurements.
degrees.
And then a lot of them growing up in the baby boomer generation, which is sort of the biggest period of a great acceleration.
The Donald
that we've seen.
Fagan era is sort of what we kind of talk about, right? With
So
the
you put
vision.
all those pieces together, and
Yeah.
there you get a shit show souffle,
Yeah.
or you get
stir that up and
Have you
pop out
have
a
you
false
got the coefficients on each of those
Yeah.
variables and the?
still working on it.
Yeah, okay. Plenty of room in the literature to
Yes.
to advance that.
Well, what you say ties into sort of what I was also thinking about was that a lot of these folks seem not to have a very good connection to the material world. Even maybe say there's engineers involved and scientists, but they're very academic-y, right? It's looking at things at the scale of these pilot projects or whatever. And
I've got a spreadsheet
and
for that.
spreadsheets for this sort of
Here's
stuff.
why I love saying that.
Right. And so you see that, and then you go, but once you start to actually work in the material world, you realize it becomes so visceral to you, like, boy, things are a lot harder logistically and practically than I imagined. Almost and this is what farming kicks your ass. It's like you realize nothing's going to go to plan. Things are going to break, and stuff is going to come at you that you cannot expect or predict. And you have to adapt all the time and make do with your circumstances. And it's very hard to be precious or perfect. And it's very a humbling experience. So I think a lot of these folks, whether they're academics or politicians, business tycoons, they tend to live high in what we've referred to in previous years as this tertiary economy world and distant from the real world practical experiences.
Well, and perhaps it's not a coincidence that our only ecologist amongst the false prophets says we're all going to be dead in 3 years. Right? Maybe going a little over
That's
the
not-
top
yeah.
that way,
Yeah.
but
That's not good.
But maybe that says something. I don't know. Hey, over the course of the season too, we had some thoughts from listeners about other people we should cover,
Yeah.
and we just wanted to let folks know that we kind of, in the early going and in the course of picking these folks, that we had others on the list that we thought of, but for whatever reason didn't end up making it. The one that I'm most disappointed about was a kind of a guru of the hydrogen economy, and that's Arnold Schwarzenegger.
You just wanted to do his accent.
That's the only reason.
That's the only reason.
You're so right on. I wanted to do his whole gun speech from the Terminator. It was like,
Go ahead.
the Uzi 9mm, the 45 long slide with laser sighting, 12 gauge autoloader, phase
Okay.
plasma rifle in the 40-watt range.
See, we got it in for you.
Thank you. Yeah,
Okay,
that
that's all we
That wasn't
needed.
even a good one either. It was pretty bad. But we could have had a whole episode with the three
Just
of
on
us
that.
doing Arnold.
Oh my
Arnold.
god.
Yeah. No, I think we left him out because he was really more of like a gullible promoter of this stuff.
Right.
He wasn't the technologist.
Yeah, he was a man-chiller in a sense.
Yeah.
So
anyway.
Sorry, buddy.
Yeah.
You got some other accents.
Yeah.
Okay, well, there's some other obvious ones, right? We talked about doing Mark Zuckerberg, right? Impact of social media. Jeff Bezos, who we've talked about at different times, over the seasons at Crazy Town. There's a lot that could be said about that dude. And then Donald Trump, but, too much in the news, no need to talk about him or any of those guys.
Yes. I think maybe I put on the list, I'm not sure, but George Monbiot has been kind of like driving me crazy lately. And I know Rob is a big fan of his writing, and he writes for The Guardian, and he's a British journalist, and very much you think, oh my God, over the years, Monbiot would totally be up. But I think what happened is he's totally been, just like the environmental movement in general, totally swayed and moved into the eco-modernist side of things, and talks a lot about faux food and things I do care about, like rewilding, but I think he just goes about it completely wrong. So I really we could have done an episode on that.
I couldn't, I had to veto it because, you're right. He talks about fake meat and Petri dishes and stuff that's like, this really isn't the way. But I think that's probably out of panic of just witnessing what's going on in the environmental world. I think he's grasping at straws at times. But it would be interesting to talk to him and find out, because I think he would at least have an earnest discussion and be in a nuanced space with it. He wouldn't just...
I don't think anymore he is.
I don't know.
I think he's really dug his heels
It's interesting because, Rob, you talked about how upsetting Guy McPherson was to you because he was proximate to us in a lot of ways. And you're upset with Monbiot for the same reason.
Same reason, Right? Yeah, I think he's dug in more than you know, because I've followed the food stuff more.
Yeah, maybe so. But it would be interesting to ask him and see. Maybe we'll try. Maybe we'll see if he'll... He probably won't want to talk to you after after your recommendation of turning him into a false prophet.
I had wanted to do Gerard Barron, who nobody knows about.
That would have been a great one.
So he's the CEO of the Metals Company, the Australian mining dude who presents himself as a real dedicated environmentalist, and their company presents this like insane utopian vision of deep sea mining for minerals because we need a lot of minerals for the energy transition. Right?
There happens to be these nodules lying at the bottom of the ocean, but they're 10,000 feet down, kind of thing.
Yeah, and they're like, we could just suck those up, no problem. Won't be any damage.
Elon Musk has a sub
waste.
That can go pick those up.
Sure.
Pick up a Thai soccer player and some metals.
And they're talking about like they're going to set up a metals common, and we're going to do perpetual recycling, so we could this beautiful, perfect circular economy, all to justify basically raping and pillaging the last remaining bits of untouched natural ecosystems.
There are quite a bit of amazing creatures living down there.
Yeah, but perpetual, circular. Listen to the words.
Yeah. I think we're going to hear a lot more about this in the next few years. I think this 100%. Is going to be a big...
Money's going to rush into that. Yeah.
Huge story. So thanks for flagging that. The classic, this guy's been around for a long time. We didn't cover him. Bjorn Lomborg. He's basically a man-shiller cloaked in environmentalism and sort of rational economic arguments. I don't know why we didn't choose him. I guess maybe he's not as big a ideologist. But anyway, we didn't pick him.
Yeah. Well, I also think his arguments about climate's not really a pressing problem. It's just like, okay, we probably don't need to cover them. Anybody that's listening to this show is going to be like, yeah.
Right.
The other last few that I want to bring up is kind of a triumvirate. Elizabeth Holmes, which would have been a female.
Yeah.
That's unusual for us.
But also, she did fake her voice to be kind of deep.
Yeah. And then also Adam Newman and Sam Bankman-Fried. And of course, those three are exemplars of Silicon Valley capitalism.
You got to say who Adam Newman is, because people probably don't know.
He was the WeWork guy.
Right.
And then Sam Bankman-Fried is the crypto bazillionaire. He's now headed to jail. So, yeah, just looking at overdoing it in the whole business and investing world.
Well, basically offering like magical answers to things and basically
nothing there.
Conning people.
Yeah. Another sort of review of the season that I want to bring up is the load of toxicity that kind of got dumped on us. And Alana, our star researcher, brought this up first because she was ahead of us.
Yeah.
diving into these people. And it takes its toll. I feel like early in the season, we were like bright-eyed, bushy little squirrels gathering acorns. Now
we gained 10
Now we're
years.
like the roadkill. The car ran over us. The only thing that's left is our tail waving in the wind, but our guts are splayed out all over. Okay, that's enough of that imagery.
We're in heroin slumps all the time.
Yeah. It's
well, that's why Tom Friedman's got ambulances ready for all these.
Right. He's got a blood bank on the racetrack. I remember that story. Yeah, but no, it just it's hard to look at these false prophet ideologies that are so much more mainstream than what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the truth is, we were getting, I think, increasingly over the course of the season, getting sort of crabbier and crabbier. I think the Guy McPherson one almost broke us a little bit.
Yeah.
We used to, before each episode, we'd like tell jokes and make each other laugh. And this season, we just punch each other in the face.
I think I got a taste of this because I was writing the taxonomy paper. I was sort of surveying the landscape in kind of more depth than you guys. You were sort of waiting for Alana to get ahead enough. But I was really delving in and creating my own sort of schema, obviously. So, yeah, I felt it. I think I felt it earlier on than you guys maybe did.
Yeah. So anybody out there, you ever meet us, we just need a hug.
But not from these guys, not the false prophets.
Oh, come on. You know you'd like a big Steve Pinker hug.
I want a Steve Bannon hug.
We said, who would you most want to be hugged by? That's a good question.
That is a good question.
I don't
Ray
think I can
Kurzweil,
answer it.
maybe.
I think Ray Kurzweil.
Yeah.
I'm going with Ray.
Okay.
I'm going off the charts. I'm going back to Arnold Schwarzenegger. Those giant pecs crushing me in his arms.
I'll let you have that.
I think last thing I would just sort of say, about the season is that we also did struggle, I think, with that balance of critiquing and criticizing and not being just like 100% dicks,
right?
To the and I gotta say, it was a fine line in some cases. Sometimes because the people themselves rankled us. But we actually did this season because we really wanted to talk about the false ideas, and we were using in some ways the false prophets as the vehicle for that. But we had to talk about these people. Do you know what I mean? And it's easy. So maybe sometimes it became too easy to sort of mock or whatever. And I don't think we were trying to be super hurtful. Some of them deserve it.
I do remember as we were getting going on the season, kind of debating that.
Right.
Like, do we even do this? Because do we want to be making fun of somebody like that?
Right.
And we decided to focus on people that were in the public eye. Right. On some level. And were actually out there publicly advocating for something. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? They weren't just like toiling away as an academic working on some paper like Jason Bradford or something. You know what I mean? They were, and then we're going to go shit all over them, what I mean, for their ideas. There were people who were actually out there.
They were self-promoters. A lot of these guys are self-promoters.
Various degrees of it, but for sure.
Thanks for listening. If you've made it this far, then maybe you actually like the show. If that's true, then there's one very simple thing you can do to help us out. Share the podcast, or even just this episode. Think of 3 people you know who would get a kick out of Crazy Town. Use your podcast app to share it, or send a text, or go way old school and tell them face to face. Let's build a Crazy Town community so that one day we might be able to escape it. 3 friends, please share.
Okay, well, there's no false prophet to key out and discuss, but I kind of want to talk about the taxonomic treatment and the typology.
Of course you do.
Of course. It's one of my favorite.
I've never seen you so proud.
Well, it's the best work.
Well, what about the 134 birds that he saw in the county this month? I think he's prouder of that.
That might be true.
Yeah, okay, it's a toss-up. It's a toss-up. I also like my dog and proud of my family. Anyway.
Those are 3rd and 4th.
Yeah. Okay. So a couple questions come to mind. Could I have done better? Are there things I missed out on? And I think actually, if I'm going to be honest,
if you're a true or false prophet, you'd say no, of course not.
But I'm going to be honest with myself, and I think I missed a couple things maybe that I could have added. And so one, I might have called this species the illiberati. And these are the ironically sort of intolerant people who think they're being hyper tolerant. They might even burn books. They lean towards authoritarianism, but they're very lefty. And a good example of this would be that there's a podcast came out called The Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling. And it kind of goes over sort of the attitudes of maybe this species, the Illiberati, okay? Another one that we explained in our intro episode was the obviously right-wing authoritarian type figures. And they're also into book burning, but they're also into assault weapons. And, they say things like sovereign citizenship and the Al-Qaeda. So like we're talking about like the Bundys, the Al-Qaedas. Remember that? That was a great term. Maybe this species I'd call the patriots. So, because they call themselves patriots,
I'm sorry.
Patriarchy also.
Yes.
I'm struggling with a verbal response because I'm just thinking of, can you take a pile of books and start a fire by shooting an automatic weapon at it?
Right.
We should ask the Mythbusters guys to check it out. It's interesting that you bring that up because I think that I would say if you look at the false prophets that we picked, if you try to look at them from a political lens, when you get to Bannon and maybe more, I don't know. Yeah, I would say more politics. But for the most part, they're probably skew more in the liberal side of the political equation.
Or at least the liberal that will destroy any lefty notion, like Bill Clinton.
Sure. But, there's a ton of false, dangerous ideas that are coming from the political right that we didn't really get into.
Well, the Bannon episode was probably the most we went into this. Yeah. And so this group I just called the Patronauts would likely be allied with sort of the Bannon side of thing. And we did talk about in that episode with Bannon, the difference between liberalism and traditionalism.
Yeah.
And so it may fall in this. And we did bring up accelerationism, but we didn't cover that side of things as much.
And I guess my point is it may be half of the picture. Do you know what I mean? Or maybe it's more than half of the picture. I don't know. Just in terms of when you think about the ecosystem of false prophets, false ideas, and influence out in the public sphere. Yeah. We focused on things that probably are closer to our camp, which is part of why we did it, because there are people who are actually somewhat engaging the issues that we're concerned about.
All this means to me is Jason's got all kinds of opportunity to publish in Nature and Science, in the popular press. He's going to be making the tour of talk shows.
Totally. And there actually were a couple of false prophet species that were in the paper that we didn't even cover.
Right.
So there's the Q-fluencer, right? So QAnon is just absolutely, it's too easy, right?
Yeah.
But then there's the whole group of what we call the evolutionary enlightenment movement. And I think I call them like Conevolver or something like that. So they basically, it's like, you're going to become one with the cosmos through meditation and ayahuasca ingestion. And so anyway, go to the paper. I feel there's a lot of value there. I could add a couple things to it. But that's the thing. Science is always advancing.
It's progressing.
It's progressing. Okay.
Maybe Pinker was right.
Yeah, maybe.
Infinitely growing science.
Okay, so this being our final episode of the season, sort of a chance for us to reflect. I was thinking a bit about what are the lingering questions for me, or takeaways or lessons that we got from talking about these false prophets. And the thing is, I don't know, what are the questions that come to your guys' minds?
Well, the first one that I thought of is, why the hell are we, the three of us and the people that we work with, so in the minority of ideas? Like any one of these false prophets. Okay, some of them, like Elon Musk, who's got more money than he knows what to do with and owns Twitter. Of course he can get his message out more widely than we can. But why are their messages in the majority, these delusional messages, and our messages aren't? And I'm sure there's a lot of reasons for it, but one of the things that came to mind for me is the people that were coming up with limits to growth and how to make a non-growing economy. People like Donella Meadows, Herman Daly, E.F. Schumacher.
Wendell Berry.
Yeah, their heyday was in the early 70s. It's almost like it was quaint and it's no longer the next shiny new thing. So even though it feels like a philosophy so needed today, even more so than it was at the time they came up with it, it's just not going to hold sway.
You could say that it's quaint or passé or whatever, but it was also very intentionally and strategically attacked, these ideas, right? Like if you think about, we talked about the Powell memo and coordinated efforts to basically, one, I think the system adapting itself and not wanting to change into something other than capitalism as we know it. But
do you
a lot of actors who were pushing a neoliberal agenda and saw environmentalism and saw these other things, cultural norms changing as a true threat, and they went on the fucking warpath.
Would you say that there's any sort of movements that are maybe partial but really align with us that are on the ascendancy now? I can think of people talk about regenerative ag is now a big thing, or I don't know how big it is, but idea-wise, it's the degrowth movement, the donut economics. There may be a few things like that. Anything
think
else?
People turning towards more indigenous perspectives.
Yeah. Robin Wall Kimmerer's work. Yeah.
I think a lot of younger people look at stuff like voluntary simplicity as probably a good idea, especially because it can't afford anything anyway.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, but I think to answer, it's not like it's an answer, but one possible answer to your question about why we're so in the minority, I think it's also because the closer we get, the deeper we're going into this unraveling, right, of social and environmental systems, the more desperate we are for solutions or to kind of live in denial. You know, there's like I don't know if it's just an allegory or whatever.
No, it's a real story.
How do you know what I'm talking about?
I know.
There are like, I think studies done about people and asking them about the risk of a dam failure. I mean,
that's the one I was thinking.
And the closer that people live to the actual dam, the less they saw it as a risk. Right. Because it was more existential of a threat, you know? And so I do think that might be a big factor as to why. And unfortunately, it may make it even harder, you know, for us as we get deeper into this stuff.
Yeah. Well, I also think these false prophets, I mean, you talked about it with them being overconfident, Jason, and full of certainty. Because of that, I think they offer something that sounds okay if you're not well studied or you're not well educated, and it's something people want to hear. Whereas the message of, hey, there are limits to growth, maybe think about sharing stuff a little bit more, maybe power down, that's not as sticky. There's a lot more nuance in it. It requires certainly a lot more of a systems thinking approach and probably a lot more sacrifice than anybody's wanting to consider.
And the messages of consumer culture are really not supportive of that.
No.
Well, and they're providing certainty, right? Certainty and sort of hope, whereas we're providing uncertainty, nuance, and a reckoning. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's kind of hard.
So the three of us need to go to Wharton School or Harvard Business School and get some good marketing courses.
Do you want this cheap McDonald's hamburger, or do you want this shit burger over here? Which one do you want? So here's another question I've been thinking about, which is it possible to change minds?
Nope.
Are we done?
Done. Easy question to answer.
Well,
Moving on.
Of course, there was that Michael Pollan book about the psychedelics. So there's a way to maybe make your mind more open to change using
so we should just
drugs.
Basically massive batches of psilocybin that we're going to drop in the public water supply.
Or LSD. That was the old school talk discussion. Yeah, because it's easy to synthesize in large volumes.
I liked his description of the book of the, whatever that toad licking one is. He's like, I did not like this experience. It was like being shot to the moon. Maybe it was like an Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos space exploration.
I have to tell a little side story.
Okay.
The Grateful Dead.
Yeah.
I think it was 1969. They were invited onto this show called Playboy After Dark.
Okay.
Who Hugh Hefner had on.
Yeah.
And it was actually, I don't know what it was on, but it was like recorded on video. And you like walk in with this camera and Hugh Hefner's like wearing a smoking jacket and there are all these young women dressed up and all this stuff. And then here come these fucking hippies. Do you know what I mean? And the crew for the Dead put acid in the coffee for everybody. They dosed everybody at this party. So like you could start seeing these people starting to like, what the fuck is going on?
What happened? I'm feeling funny. And they're trying to hold it together.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, there's the drug way of doing it, but also, you can take there's the big 5 personality traits, and one of them is like the spectrum of openness. So how open you are. So certain people are just going to be predisposed to having their mind being changed.
Well, that might make a big difference. I mean, there's, again, this stat is not verified, but people say you really need like 25% of the population to really believe in something to get that change. And so maybe it's trying to find the 25 that have a high openness coefficient?
Yeah, whether natural or induced.
Right, yeah. We can increase the coefficient. Maybe.
Crazy Town does not support putting any kind of drugs in anyone's coffee ever.
Yeah.
We don't even want caffeine in there.
No sugar. Yeah. I got to say, I sort of be the downer in all this, but I got to say that it's great that there's some people that have openness as a personality trait, but I am really concerned about the tendency that we're going to have, I think, of more rigid thinking when you kind of mix this cocktail of uncertainty and fear and crises happening and sort of the tendency to resort to tribalism, for a sense of security. And then you got technology-fueled polarization that's happening. And then the dynamic of like people with these rigid, fixed, extreme positions,
right.
Whatever they are, being on the opposing sides of one another, just reinforcing the other side, right?
Because, so have you seen any of this happening
never.
in recent times?
I mean, you obviously have that as political polarization that we're having in this country, but it's just going to be really hard, I think, for openness and people to change their minds when we're faced with all of this stuff and all this uncertainty.
Can I give you a little bit of hope, maybe?
Please.
Okay.
Please, man.
Okay, a couple of things come to mind, and this is not that hopeful, but I'm trying.
Okay, it's all relative. Yeah. It's on a relative scale, dude.
Yeah, it is.
Do something.
Okay. First of all, that people talk about the generational shift. So young people are much more.
All right, so we're all dying off. That's the hope.
Yes.
Okay, good.
The old people die off. Young people have less lock into our current system. They don't have a mortgage and jobs and investments. And
that's great
market.
News. I'm sure they think that's great news. No mortgage,
no home, no prospects, but no food.
Well, there's the whole idea of loss aversion. People are very nervous about losing what they already have. But if you're young,
if you got nothing,
you're more flexible and you have less to lose at the moment.
Right.
So that's a big deal. And so when the young creates new social norms, it does lead to then older people, a certain percentage of them, Archie Bunkers of the world, changing a little bit.
It's true. You see this, you look at polls of generations asking people about their views on capitalism, degrowth, all these things that skew much younger towards kind of the things that we talk about as being necessary.
I know.
Right?
It's like we are hip. Like when we talk, we're like the
hip.
We're like the in crowd. We're like the hip.
Every listener right now is rolling their eyes.
Yeah.
I don't even know what you're talking about.
Hip? Yeah, my hip hurts.
Right. Okay. The other thing is that we have two opposing forces at work going on. We have the material conditions are going to be so disruptive, like you're talking about, that it leads to stress. And that leaves the opening for new ideas to come in that better explain reality. And that is a positive. But then on the other side, I acknowledge that same stress leads to the tension that you're seeing or the worry you see of making people more conservative, tribally affiliated, locked into beliefs. But I think that it's both at the same time, right? There's some yin-yang-y thing or whatever.
So you're actually basically speaking Post-Carbon Institute's theory of change in some ways. And Rob, you talked about this earlier. We talked about 25% of the population. And that gets to the theory of diffusion of innovations, which I don't know if we talked before about on this podcast, but diffusion of innovations basically like this theory that has actually been tested in a lot of different conditions and situations of how you can call them new technologies or you can talk about them new behaviors, new norms are adopted, right? So you have this bell-shaped distribution. You've got your innovators, which is a small percentage, very small percentage of the population. Then you got your early adopters.
Yep.
And then you have this set of early majority, late majority, and laggards, right? And so it's sort of this distribution. So the key thing there is having these innovators and early adopters developing these alternatives and keeping those ideas alive, which is where the shock doctrine comes in. That's the other half of our theory of change, right? It's diffusion of innovation on one hand, of how new behaviors get adopted, and that meets the shock doctrine, which is basically look, shocks happen, and when crises occur, according to Milton Friedman's famous quote, that ideas that are politically untenable or implausible become inevitable, right?
Yeah.
So what you have to do is develop these ideas and keep them alive for when crises create that opportunity. Now, you have, as you just talked about, we're going to see lots of regressive, negative, wrongly directional solutions being offered out there in response to these crises that we're going to have to be competing with in a sense, right? But there's still an opportunity there as these shocks happen for people to turn to new ideas and new solutions. And that's why we have to support this community of innovators and early adopters to sort of keep those things alive and develop those.
Do you feel better now?
A little bit.
Okay, good. I'm glad I led you to that.
I feel better because I was just thinking how Ray Kurzweil is an early adopter, or actually the innovator of nanobot computronium solutions, and I'm just a laggard.
Yeah,
you are a laggard.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
No blue nanobots for you, buddy.
I believe one of the most important things that we can do right now is be comfortable with uncertainty. Be willing to see things in these shades of gray, avoid the black and white thinking. And I know that PCI is part of this liminality network. I think liminal space is a really interesting way to think about this. It's sort of the space in between two conditions, right? And understanding that you're in this in-between space, in-between time. And so what we are trying to do in a sense is figure out how to stay in that space, how to be on that kind of tightrope walk between understanding that there's an incredible scale and scope of change that needs to happen. And that is overwhelming when you think about it. But you also can't be so overwhelmed that you can't do anything. You're demotivated.
Yeah, I love the word liminality and thinking about liminal spaces. And it's actually used as a term not just for being sort of on a threshold between two spaces, but it's also often used to talk about rites of passages.
Oh, interesting, yeah.
And so, yeah, Postcarbon helped launch, and now we're hosting this global network that we called the Liminality Network specifically because it was designed to help explore that uncertainty and to stay in that space. And we've advocated resilience, right? Community resilience. We have a website called resilience.org for a super long time. We have papers that we've written. We wrote a whole book called The Community Resilience Reader. But I was thinking a lot recently about properties of resilient systems and flexibility as one of those properties that you almost can't emphasize enough, you know? And it's like having that mentality of being able to live with that uncertainty and being flexible, because the truth is we don't know. I mean, we sit here and we critique these false prophets who present these certain pictures of like, we can solve this problem this way or that way or that way, or we're going to go conquer all the stars in the sky. And we're like, no, that's not going to happen. But we don't actually ourselves know how things are going to unfold. So living with that uncertainty is really key, and doing it with other people and not feeling alone with it, because that's really tough. And that's part of why we did this podcast, is for ourselves and our listeners to not feel alone with all of that uncertainty.
Yeah, I think if you want to take the idea of liminal spaces and what you're talking about, living with uncertainty, into a practical arena, why not technology? Like, I often ask the question, how much technology is enough, right? You have the Luddites or the Amish or groups that have said, we're going to call a point of how much is enough. But our society tends to say there is no limit to it. More technology is always better.
I've got a clear limit. It's the Bezos line, and it's where I still want to be able to have one of those little Amazon buttons, you know, when I run out of toilet paper, I can just push the button and they send it to me. Can we just make that the
the Bezos line?
The Bezos line. That's the minimum threshold of technology. Is that cool?
Not cool. not cool. I mean, I think there's a Goldilocks somewhere in here, right? Yeah. Too little, and maybe you're living a difficult life and you're undermining the life support systems of the planet. But this is an open question. We're not going to answer it, but how in the world can society decide on where that is, other than the Bezos toilet paper button?
The problem is that society is not deciding, right? Yeah. We're quote unquote letting the market decide, which is all geared towards no limits. That's a big problem. I struggle with this question too, Rob, because I don't have an answer to this. Like, what level of complexity and globalization do we need? Like, let's say we're going to scale way down, but we still want technology, right? And we want renewables. So we're going to live more agrarian lives. The future is rural, but we still want to have some technology. I'd like, our village to have some solar panels, even if we're not consuming as much electricity as we've been.
Yeah.
But what level of complexity and globalization and systems do we need to get just that bank of solar panels in my little eco village?
I'll say not as much as a phalanx of nuclear power plants, but still, maybe.
No, that is a tough one. And I think about this all the time because my farming I do, and my son Davis is really into sort of electronics, and we're electrifying a tractor. And I can tell you that there's so many details that you have to sort through. And we do worry actually there's little microchips in here that make sure our control system for, when you thumb throttle whatever, that the power gets distributed and the batteries don't fry, or it's ridiculous how complex this all is. And I don't know the answer, but there was an interesting discussion on Nate Hagen's podcast, The Great Simplification, with Simon Michaud, where he was talking about trying to get these engineers in Finland, where he's based, these are students, to imagine a cell phone that wasn't a smartphone, but it was just you can call and you can text, and that's all. And you can only get materials within 1,000 kilometers of where we're sitting right now. What would you do? And they basically came up with something. And it was if you can simplify it down to levels of technology that are not as grand, as refined, as complex as we have today, there's a lot actually we've figured out that you maybe with, say, 3D printing and simpler materials, less purity requirements, not quite as quote-unquote efficient as we have now. But so can we do this for all kinds of stuff? Can we make the solar panels that you can actually remake regionally, and can we make the computer chips that can allow you to have control systems for electronics but don't require the super clean rooms? I think these are great questions.
It's interesting. You guys know that I biked down here yesterday to do this podcast from Portland.
Very good.
In a moment,
you did it.
Well, it's a moment of footprint lowering madness. Okay,
right.
So my legs are pretty tired. But no, one of the things I was thinking about while riding is just how we could have a far simpler amount of technology. As I'm coming down on the bike, I'm just getting slammed by cars and trucks and stuff going by. But then there were other parts of the trip where I was literally on this narrow wooded path with birds chirping and streams flowing by. And there were other pedestrians and scooterers and cyclists. And what a missed opportunity for us to actually have regional transportation networks like that. Like a small amount of space, still plenty of room for nature. To me, that's kind of an example of a level of technology that we could have that would be helpful, make our lives better without beating the shit out of the wilderness and nature.
I know. Bike paths between towns would be so amazing, wouldn't it? Oh, yeah.
Well, necessity may
That's right.
may hasten that.
That's right.
Okay, I'm the question guy today.
This is awesome.
Here's some other big. Here's another big question.
All right, hit me.
That this season has brought up for me. What if we are wrong?
Yeah, but we're not.
But that question. I mean, I wonder if how many of our false prophets wrestle with that question themselves. I mean, they certainly come across as being quite certain in their beliefs. Maybe
they'll even sue you.
Well, some of them,
if you get challenged on it.
But that's actually to me a great indicator of uncertainty and doubt. But I don't know. I can only speculate.
I mean, I do it all the time. I think how much nicer it would be to live in the space of some of these false prophets. And I feel like I went from being an eco-modernist when I was young in my career to sort of learning, studying the evidence, working with different people, looking at things happening in the world of conservation and environment, and changed from there. So when you were calling out the eco-modernists, you would have hated me, Jason.
Well, I probably was like that too. I wasn't probably as sophisticated as you were at the time, but I probably bought into, the Sierra Club sends a magazine and there's Amory Lovins getting press and Mother Jones or whatever. And I was in my own research head of starting a young family. I didn't think as deeply as I did.
I always talk about the early days because before I joined Post Carbon Institute, I had started an organization working on climate change issues, and I absolutely think of that time as swimming in the shallow end of the pool. Yeah. I was all focused on kind of low scale behavioral changes.
Right.
You know, I did not have a systemic understanding of what
Yeah.
we're facing at all. But, you know, I think some people could listen to us and say, these guys are way too certain. They act too certain. They're
Right.
so like, you know, whatever, full of their own ideas and their own perspectives. But I guess the thing I'd say about this, one is, I think it's important to challenge ourselves. Mm-hmm. But two, and this is maybe is just presented as it could be viewed as being defensive. I would kind of flip the question and say, well, what's the consequence of being wrong? So
Right.
what's the consequence of us being wrong versus the consequence of some of these false prophets
We have
being
awesome
wrong?
bike trails all over the place.
Right.
Well, remember Greg Craven, your former neighbor?
Yeah.
He had like 1 million something hits on YouTube. He's a high school teacher.
Yeah,
Right.
And he had the box with the like
They're the 4 quadrants.
the 4 quadrants.
Yeah.
Anyone say can you talk about that?
That was around climate.
Well, yeah, it was all about climate and risk, right?
Yeah.
So the risk of us thinking that this was back in the day where they're still kind of fighting against the hoax kind of thing.
Yeah.
So climate deniers. And
Right.
his whole thing was, well, the risk of the deniers being right just doesn't compare to the collapse issues we're going to have if those who actually understand the science are right.
Yeah, and that's what's ironic about like these long-termists and sort of they understand that the technology that they're advancing could kill us all off.
Right. It is interesting that existential risk guys, you know,
Yeah.
who are pathological because if they're only focused on only the risks that keep humanity in existence, and that's it.
Right.
Forget the risks to like suffering and quality of life or whatever. Or even if 80% of us die, that's okay as long as 20% can get us to space.
As long as we have civilization
Yeah.
intact and modernism.
So that's all insane. But you think that there could be some like contingency plans. Some thinking about like maybe we shouldn't put all our eggs in the basket.
Well, the hunter gatherers in the bunkers.
Oh, right, that was their contingency plan. You're right.
That's why
I'm being completely unfair.
That's why E.O. Wilson's got it, the 50% Earth.
Oh, that's a great contingency.
That's what a perfect contingency.
yeah.
But it's true. If I'm sorry to say this, if we're wrong, people maybe have a better quality of life. Maybe you could say people who could have lifted themselves out of energy poverty or material poverty could have
Right.
had huge, massive televisions in their houses and drive fancy cars. That's a downside, I guess, of us being wrong. But the flip side, holy shit.
But we're also saying you have agency, you can take action. We have to do the opposites. Yeah. If you listen to these false prophets, most of them are basically like either we're completely doomed, or we're going to solve this through advanced technology that really you have no part to play in.
Yeah, that's true.
And so I think that we give, actually, what the irony is that we give people something to do that will give them a sense of purpose and meaning in their life. And that is valuable.
Give me that! Give me that letter! Get off! They're my letters!
So what do you call a podcast without listeners?
Crazy Town?
Yeah, exactly. 3
No,
bloviating.
we have listeners.
No, yeah, we actually love our listeners and wanted to take just a little bit of time to highlight a few of them. So I said, let's each take one person who's contacted us and have a miniature mailbag here.
All right.
So why don't you
Okay.
kick us off, Asher?
Well, actually, I want to start with a critique that we got, or somebody expressing some concern about something we talked about. So one of our listeners, Laura, who is a cell and molecular biologist, and she's worked in biolabs, she was concerned about what you, Jason, and I talked about the COVID lab leak theory.
Yeah, okay.
And I think she was concerned that, we were, fueling beliefs that it was a lab leak. But I think the point we're trying to make, and so I'd like to clarify that in case there's confusion, is not that we had a position on whether or not there was a lab leak or not a lab leak, but bring up the precautionary principle and sort of like the risk. Here we are in these labs, with gain of function, doing things, and we might be doing them ostensibly because we're worried about the risks of a virus breaking out in a pandemic. But it's a little bit hubristic to think that we could do it in perfect conditions and there would never, ever be a consequence like a leak happening. Right?
Yeah.
So whether it did in this case or not.
Yeah, we don't know. I think we said we don't know, but they've said that the fact that it's plausible is what's worrying.
Right. And that we don't take a precautionary principle or think about these risks very much.
And that this technology that is getting easier and easier, and it's lowering the threshold so that you don't have to be in a Bio4 lab and start making some of this stuff is the concern, I'd say. Yeah. So thank you for pointing that out. We don't want to come down on strongly that we think this is a lab leak by any means.
Well, and Laura's also right in line with me. I question most things that you guys say in this podcast.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to Don, who is one of our most dedicated listeners. He's a former professor who studied sustainable population and other ecological topics, and now he's a farmer.
Oh my gosh.
So, in line with
Does
Jason.
he like birds?
Oh, I'm sure he loves birds.
It's like a brother from another mother.
Very,
I hope so.
Very tasty. So the backstory of his email is that he also listens to Dave Gardner's Growth Busters podcast. And Don had written some ideas about agricultural policy and sent them over to Dave. And in Dave's podcast, he said he's making a run for president, maybe a Green Party candidate or something. And he's taking Don's agricultural suggestions as his policy platform. Nice. And Don asked us to catch up, and we should be running someone for president and taking his policy procedures as well. So I wanted to ask, which one of the three of us are we putting up for prez?
Well, this is pretty easy. Oh. I could tell you it's not me because I was not born in this country. So
you can't be president?
I can't be president, just like Ted Cruz.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Well, I was born a U.S. citizen, but I was born on foreign soil.
That's the criteria?
Down to you and me, Jason.
We'll have to Rochambeau for that.
It's not going to be me because I've already run in the past.
You ran for president?
I didn't run, but somebody ran me on the Steady State Economics platform.
Are you serious?
How many votes did you get?
I had probably him. He sent me some bumper stickers. Actually, our Bill Ryerson was my vice presidential candidate. We've worked with him in the past.
Oh, I think you're the most experienced candidate then.
No.
Should be you.
No, I didn't campaign at all.
Right. Well, I'm not campaigning, that's for sure.
Anyway, thanks, Don.
No wonder we're so screwed. None of us are willing to do anything.
Thanks, Don, for listening.
All right, Luis, he had this funny quote. He says, "Big thank you for the amazing work. My therapist seems very happy with the extra sessions."
You're welcome.
Yeah.
That is actually, we're getting paid by the American Psychotherapy Association.
That's right. We get a kickback from BetterHelp or something like that.
Right.
Okay, he also had a suggestion for fixing, or I would say not improving, or making the insufferability index even more relevant.
More insufferable?
We'll get into that. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay, we talked about attacking the person versus attacking the idea, and where we really kind of leaned into making fun of the person this season was the insufferability index.
Yeah.
But we heard that people found it kind of fun, and we tried to keep it lighthearted. But I thought it would be interesting to look at how we rated everybody and see who came out at the top, who...
You're the statistician, right?
Yeah, of course.
Oh my gosh, I can't wait.
I wish I had a drum roll. Most insufferable was Steve Bannon with a score of 9.3 out of 10.
That's up there, dude.
That is high. That's Voldemort territory.
That's definitely Tucker Carlson territory.
That's Tucker Carlson territory, not Voldemort. Sorry.
Yeah. Voldemort's off the
He's
chart.
a 10.
You got to drop then to Jack Welch, our greatest CEO of all time, at an 8.5. Then Elon Musk at 8.0. And then it starts going down. Barrett Moore, our con man, doom prepper guy, 7.2. Bill Clinton, 6, and so on. Our least insufferable, I guess that's the most sufferable, is the two-headed monster, Mark Jacobson and David Keith, got a 3.3.
They each got 3.3?
I think we just scored them together. And William McCaskill, also, the long-termist, 3.5. So it's almost like the more frustrating the thing they're promoting, but the more sufferable they are.
Well, I think that gets to how we view their intentions, right?
Yeah.
Which
that's right. We gave them a lot of cred for not being really awful people that we wouldn't want to hang out with, kind of thing.
Which gets to the point, I think, that Louise had brought up, which is we're kind of scoring them based upon not do we want to have a beer with them or not, but a little bit more about who they are as individuals,
Right.
And he brought up a good question, which is how would we score them in terms of like who's the most dangerous?
Yes, exactly.
Good. It's a good question.
Okay, so I thought about the most dangerous, and what's interesting is that I kind of came up with Steve Bannon as maybe the most dangerous, which is interesting because he also was the highest the scorer on our traditional list. So he would have stayed at the top if we would have added danger. But I basically, because he represents this traditionalist movement and is into accelerationism in a sense, or is aligned with a lot of accelerationists that have very, very far right, nationalistic, veering into fascism kind of views. And I think just that's so scary for the future because I can see our society being pulled apart by this stuff. So anyway, no more. I don't need to say any more about him. That guy scared me.
Yeah, I mean, he's dangerous, but I don't think he holds a candle to Elon Musk. Just
Why?
From the point of being that influential. I mean, the guy
having that much money,
that much of a speaker,
Twitter platform.
Yeah, and we talked about how he combines the characteristics of so many of these others. He takes the CEO crap of Jack Welch and combines it with the eco-modernist stuff and the long-termist stuff. It's just with all that roiling around in somebody with so much reach. And you got to remember how recent it is that he's been kind of knocked off the pedestal just a little bit, right? I mean, he was considered such a hero. We covered that.
You make a very good case, and I'm open to changing my mind, but I'm not going to in this case.
Yeah, I don't think you're actually open. You don't have that trait.
We should be glad he wasn't born in this country either because he can't run for president.
That's right.
Talking about dangerous. I'm actually going to go the other way, right?
Ooh, what?
The two guys who scored lowest on our insufferability index, I feel like are pretty dangerous. So we're talking about Jacobson and Keith, Mark Jacobson, David Keith.
Okay.
And it's for this reason, which is that as we go deeper into the shit show that is the 21st century, the more desperate we are going to be to address the crises that we're facing. We're going to be dealing with energy crises and climate, and they're going to be much more front and center. And so these ideas that the solutions that are available to us are electrifying everything, just massive build out of renewable energy, or we got to suck carbon out of the atmosphere or geoengineer are going to be that much more appealing. And when you put those out as sort of like the only games in town, no conservation, none of the stuff that we talk about, that's dangerous to me.
That's a good point. I actually, you make a strong case, and actually, if you look at what's happening in the news a lot, my son was passing this on. He kind of hears me rant, and then he follows news, and apparently in the Inflation Reduction Act, Build Back Better kind of program, there's so much money going to the kind of Keith sort of direct air capture technology. Yeah, and it is a frightening amount of money.
But these things are beautiful. I mean, what's better than taking corn-based ethanol and then trying to capture the carbon from that, and then building pipelines and pushing that through pipelines and then burying it in rock in the Dakotas? That seems beautiful and perfect to me.
Absolutely logical.
It is so mad. It makes that MacArthur Foundation $100 million look like chump changes. Billions are going to go to this stuff. And it's terrible.
That's true.
Terrible?
Terrible, yeah.
Terrible. I think it's probably the best word for it.
God, is that a malapropism?
I can't tell you. It's amygdalatious.
Okay. I do that a lot, don't I? Anyway, sorry about that, folks. Which gets to, maybe we should rate each other. And I realize that I may not score so well given my impediments.
Well, I know
speaking.
The person I least want to have a beer with in this room is me. Okay? So.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. I don't think we should rate each other because the truth of the matter is I love you guys. And I hate myself. So, what's the point of doing it? What I'd rather have is our listeners rate us.
Yeah. Maybe we could
Let's get objective, opinions from our listeners.
Maybe at the crazy town hall. That could be one of the
you guys all suck. Personality, 0.
Well, zero's good. Zero's good.
Oh, wait. So we're good. Yeah.
We're going to be good.
They're just going to say, you guys are zeros. And we're like, yeah.
Is that bad at the end of the season? I still don't understand the rating system.
That's bad.
Every decision I've ever made in my entire life has been wrong. My life is the complete opposite of everything I want it to be.
If every instinct you have is wrong, then the opposite would have to be right.
Okay, regular listeners will know that we try not to just rant incessantly without giving you some ideas of taking action or having agency, and that's our Do the Opposite segment. And I thought it would be fun, or maybe informative, maybe, dare I say, inspiring for each of us to share a do the opposite from the season that struck you.
I'm going to break the rules quickly because I don't know if this is exactly a do the opposite, but we talked about this in the do the opposite segment of the Pinker episode.
All right.
And it's really stuck with me.
That was one of our first episodes.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
I still have a memory.
It's really good. Yeah. You're like a turtle or something.
Who's Steven Pinker?
He's going to be so offended. You don't know who he is. Anyways, that whole episode is about how he basically wants to hold on with both hands, a death grip to all the progress that we've made in terms of like
enlightenment now.
A death grip on progress? Does that
exactly.
kill progress?
But I think, all the progress, scientific progress we've made, social progress, all the gains of the last few centuries. And for me, we talked about this in the Do the Opposite. It's like, how do we figure out how to maintain those gains? Not in the context of the great acceleration where we're just consuming the living shit out of everything and growing.
And having modernity surround us. And
doing it in the context of a great unraveling and a great simplification. How do we hold on to that? That conversation is not happening anywhere. So that to me is a do the opposite. Like, let us have that conversation because I share those desires, those values. And I'm deeply worried that we're going to lose them in the context of things kind of breaking apart.
That was super erudite, and thank you for reminding me of that. I was struck by one of the Do the Opposites in the Elon Musk episode, which is quite recent, so I didn't have to think that far back.
Yeah, cheater.
Yeah, that was actually came from our friend Phil, who basically put out the idea on Earth Day of investing in what can run on solar flows and be built and repaired with natural and local materials. And I get into, I look at stuff like the day I was working on the tractor, and we have this wooden mallet. And you can imagine, you could make this, right? Like if you got trained in this, you could actually harvest ash trees or whatever, and you could make a wooden mallet. And I'm looking around me and how beautiful it would be if I have one of these brooms that was crafted by hand too, with sorghum broom and hazelnut wood or whatever. I think that would be great if we had a world like that. So more people learning those skills and building that potential.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's actually some, I don't know if I'd call it a movement, but there's definite interest in it. People are looking into how can I make a blade? How can I, build stuff with my hands? It's become very popular.
Yeah. Folk schooling, they call it sometimes. A craft economy.
Yeah. Well, you were worried yours isn't very erudite. I don't know about mine as a, it kind of seems like a bit of folk wisdom, but I don't know. I just really liked it. And it's the idea of maybe it cuts across all our false prophets. And it's like, don't engage in the wishful thinking and the delusions that you find, no matter how credentialed the people speaking it may be. It doesn't matter if you went to Harvard or Stanford or Yale or whatever, or Oxford if we want to go to a different country. You've really got to think, if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And just build up. I don't want anybody to be cynical, but I definitely want us all to be skeptical.
How many of our false prophets went to an Ivy League school or Ivy League-like school like Stanford or Oxford or whatever? It's tremendous, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a high percentage. It'd be an interesting stat to look at.
That's why I dropped out of high school.
That's right. You had no chance of getting into those.
Well, that's true too.
Yeah.
I think along the lines of what you're saying, Rob, on some level, every one of our false prophets is evangelizing an answer, in all caps. Like, whether they're presenting as the answer and other things are not the answer, like it's somehow a solution. And doing the opposite is constantly testing our own beliefs in a simple answer of any kind, right? And in our certainty as cracks in the facade of industrial society sort of break open.
Yeah, well, somebody who has really brought to the forefront this idea of testing your own beliefs is Megan Phelps Roper. And Jason, you mentioned that podcast, The Witch Hunt of J.K. Rowling.
The Witch Trials, yeah.
Trials, yeah. Megan actually was the host of that podcast, and she had gained a fair amount of fame, at least sort of the TED Talk variety of fame, when she broke away from this church that had, the horrible anti-gay...
Westboro.
Yeah, Westboro Baptist, yeah. And I don't know, I'm really fascinated by her. Like, she seems like just a really kind-hearted, thoughtful person, which is amazing given her background. And she had these 6 questions that you should ask yourself about how you think.
Because the idea was when she was in that church, she and they were all convinced that they were on the righteous side.
Yeah.
And they were doing wonderful things.
And what was interesting about her story, too, is that the more vitriol and hatred they got back for all the hatred that they put out, the more certain they became, right? The more they felt like they were actually sacrificing and they were committed to, in a sense, the cause. It was reinforcing their certainty,
right.
you know?
Yeah.
Right.
And it took people, her interacting with people actually on Twitter, of all places, who took a lot of time to be patient with her, that kind of cracked open.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, that's different from us, where we sit here and make fun.
Well,
and,
so that's do the opposite.
sarcastic.
Don't do what we do, listeners. Don't mock people all the time.
You know, we need to learn from this too. I don't want to steal. I mean, I'm just going to read her 6 questions to ask yourself, but definitely encourage our listeners to look up Megan Phelps Roper and follow some of the things that she's saying. First question is, are you capable of entertaining real doubt about your beliefs, or are you operating from a place of certainty? And, you know, we've already said, get used to the gray areas. Second question, can you articulate the evidence that you would need to see in order to change your position? Or is your perspective unfalsifiable?
Yeah.
That's a tough question. And
That's a great one.
yeah. Third one, can you articulate your opponent's position in a way that they'd recognize? Or are you straw manning?
Yep. That's a great one too.
Yeah. Fourth, this one, I want all of us to pay close attention. Are you attacking ideas or attacking the people who hold them? We're going to change.
Do a little bit of both.
I know.
We're going to change our format next season.
Oops. Sorry, Megan.
Fifth, are you willing to cut off close relationships with people who disagree with you, particularly over relatively small points of contention? And then the 6th question is, are you willing to use extraordinary means against people who disagree with you, such as forcing them out of their jobs or homes, using violence or threats of violence, celebrating their misfortune or tragedy? Yeah, really, really worth thinking about these and maybe go through the thought exercise, the mental exercise, you know, like that falsifiable,
right,
and being able to articulate what evidence you would need.
Could tell you, if we could get $3 gas from sucking carbon out of the atmosphere and turning it into gasoline, yeah, that would be falsifiable.
And as soon as we move
Not
in,
gonna happen.
as soon as you can move into an O'Neill space colony at an affordable rate.
I will change my mind.
Yeah, me too.
Right. And as soon as I can get a little portable personal nuclear reactor to hook up to my tractor, golden. Yeah, okay. No, but I think that, the embracing of the uncertainty, the being flexible, the question, I think that is really important stuff. The other thing, though, that comes to mind is that one of the things I remember learning about is that people's belief system is often tied to what they actually do. So, for example, when I was, doing a lot of this organic farmland conversion, my thought process was, I think I talked to you about it, Rob, was that a lot of people are going to look at this as maybe suspicious, like you're doing organic farming instead of the way we've always done it here, for the last 40, 50 years.
Right.
But if it actually works and you do it well, people then, by doing it and by actually seeing it, will then start to say, you know what? I actually believe in this too. So this is, again, belief systems are often a function of what your experience in the world is, the reality of your experience, rather than just these ideas that might come in. And that's why I remember early on I said a lot of these guys are in this sort of high level academic world, political world. But when you get your hands dirty in the real world and you're forced to change how you actually behave on a day-to-day basis, maybe interacting with nature, using your hands, building things, then I think, that's another opening for ideas in your mind to change. Yeah.
I want to sort of end the season in this episode with some appreciation. Can we do that?
Yeah,
Yes.
that's very easy, actually. I'll start with just appreciating the team behind Crazy Town. Obviously, you guys, but maybe more importantly, Melody, our producer, Alana, our researcher. We've got Taylor helping us out with transcripts. So much behind the scenes help that people are doing. We've got Clara helping us with promotions and the whole team and staff at PCI that helps us get this out to everybody and does the helps us with the Crazy Town Hall and
then posting it on resilience.org, which is a great outlet for people to see at the shows.
So
and our donors, who, the people who actually give PCI money for this show.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and of course, everybody who takes the time to listen, thanks so much.
Yeah, and we like hearing from you, so thanks for writing to us as well.
And I know you're going to hate this, Asher, but I do want to appreciate something that I really get from the two of you, which is there's a camaraderie in discussing these really tough topics that I think it really helps me process it. I could see myself going down a dark tunnel if I were just thinking about these existential threats all on my own and not coming up with ideas for what we could do differently and just laughing along the way with it and keeping things light amongst so many dark topics. It's really important.
It's super important to be able to have conversations like this with other people. And, there's an epidemic of sort of loneliness in America. There's isolation. There's a fear of talking about difficult things because of political polarization. So I find it very important for me personally that we can actually have these conversations. And I hope that that's what we're also helping our listeners have, is finding these topics, finding these ways to talk about things, maybe hopefully with other people as well. Because again, everything is so complex and difficult to comprehend. Like no one mind can hold all this, right? And weigh all the trade-offs and difficulties with dealing with this.
Well, that's why every time you start talking, I just make a poop joke.
I think that we were very intentional with this podcast. So we knew that we've heard from people over the years who feel alone out there with this, and why we called it Crazy Town, because it feels like either we're crazy or the world is crazy. And it's kind of hard to be in that space. So hopefully, our listeners don't feel quite so alone if they're experiencing that. But also, we have this kind of plug this season, trying to encourage all of our listeners to share a specific episode or share the podcast more generally with like 3 friends. And part of the reason we want to encourage people to do that is, yes, we would like to spread the word, have more people listen, but also maybe it's an opening to have conversations with other people. And sometimes it's hard to know how to do that. It's hard to bring up these topics. It's hard to feel like you're the Debbie Downer in a situation. So, if this show could help start some conversations with others, but no matter what you do, whether it's talking about these things, it's laughing about the absurdity of the world and laughing into the face of darkness. It's doing direct action with other people. It's birding, whatever the hobby is.
Riding the bike.
Yeah.
Just don't go it alone. Find that camaraderie. I think one thing is abundantly clear to me is that there is no going it alone on any level in what we're facing. And that having camaraderie, having connection with other people, with the more than human, these are the only ways through what we're facing. So hopefully you have that in your life. If you don't, seek it out.
So basically, we're just saying to all our listeners, go out there and have a good time.
Yeah. We all love those phone apps that help us identify the sounds we are hearing, whether it is a song on the radio or a bird in the bush. Now listeners and supporters of Crazy Town can get exclusive access to our False Evangelical Con Man app for lies, or FECAL. Trained on the groundbreaking false prophet taxonomy paper, plus thousands of hours of YouTube videos, including over 300 TED Talks, this neural network is the most advanced and convenient bullshit detector ever invented. Maybe you are attending a talk on a college campus, at a business or technology conference, a campaign event, or even just overhearing some blowhard sitting next to you at a bar. Hold up your phone, launch our app, and identify the most likely false prophet species in your midst, while conveniently highlighting the diagnostic phrases they are spouting. Fecal. Shit is being flung all around you. Be alert, be informed, and don't get splattered.
Crazy town, da, 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 crazy town.
Okay, so a couple weeks back, I brought up my birding my birding stats.
Right. Yeah.
And I was hoping that maybe that some of our listeners would be interested in how I did for them.
They're not.
No, let's just wait with me, because I did get 111 species for the month of April.
They don't care.
And my target was 100.
We're not putting this in the episode.
Wait, you got 111?
I got 111.
Do not encourage him.
And so I didn't even go to the coast.
Oh, wow.
It's all within the Willamette Valley.
Stop. This is like, he's
amazing.
addicted to a drug.
Here's what's cool.
I know, but it's birds. I'd rather him be addicted to that than porn.
Exactly. This is keeping me on the up and up. I'm getting outside.
He's outside.
I'm listening. I think our listeners are going to want to know.
No, they actually probably
Oh
do.
my God! Why not?
Tell them your favorite bird.
Oh my gosh! I have no idea. They're so wonderful. I think I like hooded mergansers recently.